How to overcome the narcissist's refusal to believe you. Have you found yourself working hard to convince the person who narcissistically abused you that they were wrong to have done so? Has the effort to tell and convince them of how unjust they were to treat you this way felt consuming? And have your best arguments and points as to why you deserve better seemed to fall in the narcissistic abuser's deaf ears? Well, if you can relate to any of these questions, then today's video may be useful to you. I've found that in the early phases of recovering from narcissistic abuse, a very strong pull can be felt to speak to and confront the narcissistic abuser for what they have done to you as the survivor. And this is an important part of recovery as it reflects a growing sense that the survivor deserved much better. And the process of navigating this phase of recovery without getting stuck in it can be tricky. And in today's video, I'm going to describe some of the pitfalls that can accompany spending too much time and energy trying to convince the narcissistic abuser of the wrongness of their treatment of you. And then I'm going to offer a strategy for how to overcome the narcissist's refusal to believe what they've put you through. And I should add that this strategy may be counterintuitive, but I think it's very powerful. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in San Francisco, California, and I specialize in helping individuals recover from narcissistic abuse in individual therapy and through my online course and accompanying private Facebook community. And across these platforms, we take a three-pronged approach to recovery that involves making sense of what happened, gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser, and living in defiance of the narcissist rules. And today's video falls under the category of gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser. And if you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or partner, then I encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as the Scapegoat. And it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoated child or partner of a narcissistic abuser. What are some of the self-limiting beliefs that may have had to have been adopted to survive this type of abuse? And I think that along with today's video, the ebook can help you really realize and be convinced that none of this abuse was really your fault, but was a product of the narcissist's own psychological and emotional problems or pathologies. And you can find a link to the book in the description below or by clicking here. And if you haven't done so already, I'd encourage you to hit the subscribe button and turn notifications on so that you're alerted when I post new videos on these kinds of topics. So the survivor's desire to have it out with the abuser to correct what they did. Well, narcissistic abuse often happens in a way that subtly encroaches and becomes a tormenting dynamic for the survivor. And many clients will report feeling like they are kind of coming out of a fog as they realize how a parent or partner was narcissistically abusive towards them. You know, the survivor can feel like the story they thought they knew of their lives is actually quite different. And this is a good thing because the old story of their lives often involved them having to believe that they were undeserving or defective in one way or another to make sense of the poor ways they were treated by the narcissistic abuser. And as the survivor comes to see that this parent or partner was narcissistic, then a whole new lens gets to be looked through to explain the survivor's experience in their relationship. Instead of blaming themselves for not being able to make the narcissistic abuser happy with them, the survivor grows to see that the narcissistic abuser was motivated to find them as inadequate because that boosted the narcissistic parent or partner's own artificially inflated self-worth. And the survivor can experience some relief at knowing that there was nothing they could have done to make the narcissistic abuser treat them better. And it can, for all these reasons, be a very empowering experience for the survivor. And sometimes a subtle pull can happen in the course of this revelation that prompts the survivor to confront the narcissistic abuser for what they have done. A strong hope can be felt that the dignity that the survivor perceives themselves to have lost due to putting up with the narcissistic abuser's treatment might be recovered. An equally strong dread can also be felt that if you don't confront the narcissistic abuser, then they will get away with what they did to you. And I think that this hope and this dread can apply a lot of pressure to the survivor at this phase in recovery. And I want to compassionately submit here that no matter how strong the pull to correct the wrongs committed by the narcissistic abuser, I've rarely encountered a time when it's proven effective for the survivor. And that is, most often this experience results in frustration, invalidation, and more suffering for the survivor. That, no matter how much one takes the narcissistic abuser to task for their bullying treatment of you, the narcissistic abuser never offers the validation nor accountability that's so strongly sought by the survivor. And I think there can also be a risk to one's own recovery in pursuing justice with the narcissistic abuser. That one of the worst parts of narcissistic abuse is, I think, the isolation and invalidation experienced during the abuse. Because when it's happening, one can feel trapped in a dynamic where the same person who's hurting you is who you might also feel compelled to go towards in order to make things feel better. And therein lies a lot of the power the narcissistic abuser holds and exploits over the victim. And this can feel extremely lonely and estranging for the victim. In addition, survivors of such treatment often have many tales of protesting how they were being treated by the narcissist, only to be told they were being too sensitive, too needy, and or refused to see why they deserved the kind of treatment they were getting. In other words, they were typically met with utter invalidation by the narcissistic abuser. And as a result, the survivor suffers not just the wound of being treated as less than by someone whom they hope will offer them respect and positive regard, but also has no one else to bear witness to the suffering they experience. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to find people who can bear witness to the abuse we've suffered, because that is what helps to dispel the toxic conclusion for the victim that he or she deserves this kind of treatment. Sometimes when you have been met with invalidation while being abused for so long, it can actually become challenging to know or believe you're being witnessed when someone comes along who is actually offering such validation. And a prominent researcher and theorist on complex PTSD named Janina Fisher talks about this in her work, that there can be a real challenge in recovery to witness that you're being witnessed after the trauma and the accompanying invalidation have occurred. Well, when the survivor goes to the narcissistic abuser to get this validation or witnessing that was formerly missing, then the survivor risks another experience of not being witnessed in speaking about their suffering. And there are a few reasons why things don't often turn out very well when the survivor confronts the narcissistic abuser in this manner. First, the narcissist does not have empathy, or very little. So the survivor can feel like they are speaking, but the narcissist almost literally doesn't hear them, like in an emotional sense, as if the survivor is speaking at a normal volume, but the narcissistic abuser only sees your lips moving, again, in an emotional sense. And I think that's because the feelings of other people often just don't or can't matter to the narcissistic person. Second, if acknowledging your pain would result in the narcissist taking a hit to their own artificially inflated self-worth, then it's very unlikely for them to kind of acknowledge that. Instead, denial would likely kick in, because the mandate for the narcissist is that it's better you than them when it comes to suffering. So this is why trying to bring the narcissistic abuser to sort of justice is understandable, yet often fruitless and maybe even counterproductive to the survivor's efforts to recover. Well, how can you overcome the narcissist's refusal to believe you? The way to overcome the narcissistic abuser's refusal to take accountability for how they treated you is actually to relinquish the wish that they will finally get it, or that you can make them get it. So it's sort of a trick answer in that the way to win is to stop playing the game. And this can be way easier to write or say than to do. Surrendering the hope that the narcissistic abuser can be brought to terms can feel like the dreaded outcome mentioned earlier is happening. So the survivor may feel like they're letting, in essence, their bully get away with it. They may also feel anguish that they cannot punish the narcissistic abuser for the ways they felt their dignity was assaulted during the abuse. And these are not easy feelings to endure, but doing so, I think, can yield a tremendous reward for the survivor. that as the wish to convince the perpetrator of this abuse subsides, the value of others who readily offer their validation and compassion for what you suffered gets to count more. And actually, paradoxically, the more one insists on the narcissistic abuser being convinced of his or her wrongdoing, the more power the narcissistic abuser holds over the survivor's quality of life. And when the survivor accepts that they're going to seek confirmation of their suffering from people other than the narcissistic abuser, that abuser actually loses this form of power. And this process usually takes some time, but for these reasons can be very well worth it. And as you go towards people in your life who readily offer you validation and compassion for what you've suffered, that anguish of not being able to convince the narcissistic abuser often dissipates. And you may get to reframe the ways you coped with the abuse from feeling like you let the abuser get away with insulting your dignity to seeing how there really was nothing else for you to do but survive the abuse. And by investing in the responses of safe friends and partners to hearing about your suffering, you get to experience the validation that was so hard to come by with the narcissistic abuser. That in short, surrendering the hope to make the narcissistic abuser admit what they did to you can free you up to, as David Solani puts in his book on recovering from abusive parents, you get to then go where you're wanted and where things work. Well, thank you for watching today's video, and I hope you found it useful. And again, thank you for your continued engagement with the channel and supportive comments on the videos and to each other. And I look forward to posting again next Sunday. Take care.